In the beginning, God created the heavens, the earth, and all their inhabitants. Man multiplied, knowing good and evil. As evil was not a part of the original plan for man, God, after seeing that they could not handle such a responsibility by relying merely on what seemed right in their own eyes, gave them regulations for guidance. Man had become as the gods themselves, and therefore required a great deal of training. Alas, even with the assistance, mere willpower was not enough for any man to maintain a status of immortality. Eventually, the people required a leader, a godly person designated to give them verbal guidance, acting as a spokesperson for God. It started with a series of judges, then segued into a series of kings. Saul started off well as the first king, but he eventually became disloyal and disobedient. Afterward, David became the most memorable and honorable king. But even so, among all his good, David found himself checking out another man's wife, stealing her, impregnating her, and covering it all up by having her husband killed in battle, knowing full well he wouldn't be able to survive. But life went on. David's son Solomon became king in his stead when he died. Solomon built the Jews' very first temple, a place of permanence where they could go and worship. Throughout all of the Jewish monarchy, including a split among God's children, kings kept falling. Some were good, but eventually all the leaders available, including kings, prophets, and priests, were evil. They cared more about fame and fortune. As a result, everyone found themselves in bondage to pagan nations. First, the northern kingdom of Israel went under captivity to Assyria. Then the southern kingdom of Judah fell to Babylon. This began a series of God's people being held captive under multiple nations throughout the years. In 586 BC, the Babylonians burned down the temple that Solomon had built. Several decades of captivity later, King Cyrus of Persia, who was a non-Jewish advocate of religious freedom, conquered Babylon, then gaining ownership over the Jews, allowing some of them to go back to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple which was destroyed. After some red tape here and there, the new temple was finished in 515 BC. Later on, Alexander the Great conquered Persia in 331 BC. Religious freedom was still allowed, but it was shaky, as the Jews had to be more Greek than Jewish in order to be more successful in a newly Hellenized society. There was peace for many years until Antiochus III, a descendant of one of Alexander's governors, took over. He was primarily over Syria. After spreading his kingdom, the nation of Rome became a great threat and overcame him, taxing him heavily. In order to pay the taxes, Antiochus III had to heavily tax the people who were beneath him, which included the Jews. He even began stealing from both pagan and Jewish temples. After he died during one of his lootings, his son Antiochus IV took his place, oppressing the Jews, even selling the high priest to the highest bidder. It was at this time that religious freedom was no longer. To worship the living God was punishable by death. In Antiochus IV's attempts to paganize the nation, an old Jewish priest by the name of Mattathias Hosmon started a revolution, warring against their opponents. In between battles, they took refuge in the hills. After Mattathias died, his son Judas carried on his mission. His nickname was Maccabeus, the Hammer. His followers became known as the Maccabees, who fought back for religious freedom. After their victory over the Syrians in 139 BC, the Maccabees went back to Jerusalem to cleanse away the vandalism of the temple and to rededicate it to the Lord. It was time to reinstate the worship of God. One of the elements involved in the temple was the lampstand, which was also called the menorah, which was the only source of light in the building. As the previous menorah, which was originally gold, had been stolen, they made another one out of a cheaper metal. Then they ran into the dilemma of not having much oil to keep the menorah lit. By Jewish law, it was the priest's duty to keep the menorah ever burning brightly, never letting the flame go out. While they had only enough oil to last for a single day, God honored their zeal for Him by miraculously causing the oil to last 8 full days until they could acquire more oil. If you take care of God's business, God will take care of your business. After religious freedom was reintroduced, only a while later, a mere 139-ish years, the long-awaited Messiah, Jesus the Christ, finally came on the scene to begin liberating his people from captivity by building a new church, which wasn't a building made with hands. Hanukkah, or the Feast of Dedication, was a monumental event in setting the stage for the Messiah. All the Jewish feasts exist to keep alive the memories of all that God had done for His children. It is not a sin to neglect or to keep such festivities, but the heart of the matter is gratitude. The purpose of them is to keep our hearts thankful. Remember the goodness of God. His law is love, and His gospel is peace.